Welcome back to Andersen Acres. I'm Leanne, and here today we are going to bake. We are in the kitchen. So we are going to bake some bread. Now, because bread takes literally forever, what we're going to do is we are going to mix this, get this setting aside to rise. I've got some dough rising behind me. When it's done rising, we will shape it, and then we will bake this guy. We have an awful lot of stuff going on, so I have to make 3 different batches of dough, because how long does it take to bake bread dough? On a good day, it takes 4 hours. Why does it take 4 hours? Well, that's a good question. 4 hours is basically because first you have to mix the dough, which will probably take you about 20 minutes. And then you have to set that aside to rise, which will take at least an hour. It might take more than that, right? It might take more than that. And that's fine if it takes more than that. Don't be afraid for it to take more than that, okay? Because that happens. So what do we want after that? Then you have to shape it, put it in a pan to rise. You have to punch out all the air, shape it, pan. Then you're going to rise for another hour, at least. It might take longer depending on the relative temp and humidity in your house. So it could take quite a bit longer than that. So 4 hours is a pretty good estimate of how long it takes to take a bowl of flour, add ingredients, and turn it into bread. So because we don't have 4 hours, I literally don't have 4 hours to live stream. We're not going to stand here and go, well, we're waiting an hour. We're not going to do that. That's ridiculous. So because we're not going to do that, I'm doing 3 sets of bread. They're all on different timings. So let's start. Beyond baking the bread, we're going to discuss ingredients. We're going to discuss techniques, and I'm going to take questions. I have some prepared questions that people have sent me ahead of time, but you can also drop questions in the chat. I do have the chat running on my phone here, so that's what I keep glancing at. So if you do have a question, drop it in the chat. If you have a question that you'd like me to answer next month, second Friday of every month, we are going to do In the Kitchen. If you do have a question you'd like me to answer next month, you can drop it in the comments after this is posted as a VOD, or you can send me the questions on Facebook or wherever you happen to be. I'm mostly on Facebook and YouTube, so you can drop me questions and I will collect them, and we'll do this the second Friday of every month. We'll bake something else. We're not always going to bake bread, but we will bake something or cook something. You never know. So what are we baking today? We are baking a buttermilk bread. Buttermilk is absolutely fantastic, and I didn't pour my milk. So I have a really big thing of buttermilk. So I'm just going to really quickly pour that, because I forgot to pour my milk. That happens. And I don't have very much left. That's annoying. That's okay. It's okay, I will get more. I don't have very much left, but I have enough for this recipe. There we go. Problem solved. Okay, so first things first, we need flour. Now, I am starting with my flour, and normally you would start with your slightly warm liquid and you would dissolve yeast, but I'm actually using instant rise yeast. So there are 2 different, well, there's more than 2 types of yeast, but for the purposes of this discussion, there's 2. There's active dry, which is slightly larger and coarser, and then there is instant, which is finer and does not need to be dissolved before you use it. Which one do you want to use? It honestly doesn't really matter. If you're more of a traditionalist, go with active dry. You do have to dissolve it in your liquid first. If you're like me and you are crunched for time and don't have the extra 5 to 10 minutes, well, we're going to use instant. So that's just how you make that decision sometimes. Okay, so we have 3 cups of flour. I'm using all-purpose flour. You can be using a bread flour, whatever you like, but I'm using all-purpose. Okay, I'm going to step behind me and get a couple of ingredients. And the first one I am going to add, I'm going to basically mix my dry ingredients, and I'm adding sugar. Yes, I'm adding sugar to my bread. A lot of people don't, and that's fine. You can use honey instead. That's fine as well. you can 100% use honey. And I'm just going to adjust the microphone. It's having some issues. There we go. That's better. But you can use honey instead. You can skip a sweetener. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now I'm adding a little bit of salt. So how much? Well, it was around a teaspoon of salt and around a tablespoon of sugar. I'm not always that precise on my measurements, to be honest. I was using this for the sake of the video. Often I'm just dumping ingredients in. It often just doesn't matter. So I'm just going to use my hands and give that a little bit of a mix. Okay. Give that a little bit of a mix. And then we're going to add some yeast. How much? Usually it would be about a teaspoon, but whatever, it doesn't matter. I am very laissez-faire about adding ingredients here. It doesn't matter. So mix that in. And I'm going to kind of make a well in the middle. Now I'm going to add my ingredients that are not necessarily dry ingredients. I'm also going to apparently wipe my floury hand on my shirt. That's fantastic. What is the day if you don't have a little bit of flour? So a couple tablespoons of butter. That's my freshly made butter that I made yesterday because I didn't have any butter left. That happens. When you make your own butter, sometimes you don't have any. Now I'm going to add an egg. This is a duck egg. Why am I using a duck egg? I like them for baking. And I always crack eggs in a separate bowl because I am notoriously bad at cracking. I'm bad at it. I crack eggs and shells go everywhere. And so if I crack them in a separate bowl, I can at least fish out any shells. That one wasn't so bad. But I can at least fish out any shells. And then I don't end up with shells literally everywhere because that's what happens to me rather frequently. So yeah, we definitely want to crack our egg in a separate bowl. Then I'm going to add roughly a cup of my buttermilk, okay? Roughly a cup. And I'm saying roughly because you may have to add more at some point. I'm just going to leave that there. Just in case I don't have enough liquid, I can always add a little water. But you won't know if you have enough liquid until you mix. Now, how do you mix? Well, I'm just going to smash this egg yolk. Duck egg yolks can be a little stubborn. So how do you mix? I'm mixing literally, obviously, you just saw me plunge my hand into here. So I am mixing with my hand, which is fantastic. Okay, I'm mixing with my hand. You can mix with a wooden spoon, but you're going to have to get your hand in here at some point anyway, because one of the things we have to do with bread dough is knead it. And it's hard to knead in a bowl with a wooden spoon. It's not going to work. So at some point, you are going to have to get your hands in there. So because you have to get your hands in there, why not just get your hands in there? That's what I do. Obviously, you don't have to. You could decide I'd really rather not, and I'd rather start with a wooden spoon. Or you could mix your dough in a bread maker or any variety. You could mix it in a mixer. You can do that. But I'm just going to do it by hand because I can. Okay, it's not that I always mix it by hand. I just figured why not today? Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's dependent on how much time I have. So I like kneading dough, right? I enjoy it, but sometimes you just don't have time. And that's okay if you don't have time. Not having time is not a sin. Okay, it's not a crime. It is okay to be too busy today to mix something with your bare hands. It's okay to decide, I don't have time, I'm going to throw it in the bread maker today. That's okay. I do that sometimes, but I am doing it by hand now. And you'll notice it gets kind of crumbly. So you get this kind of crumble texture. That crumble texture is not ready, but it means that you're ready to kind of start scraping the dough off the sides. Okay? You are able to start grabbing the dough and using that to get the little bits off the sides of the bowl. And then always make sure you turn it over because the side you're not scraping on the bowl is going to end up quite a bit drier. So then I'm going to put this here, flatten it a little bit, get as much out of here as I can, and ditch the bowl. This bowl is pretty empty now. Okay, that bowl is pretty empty. There's very little left. There's maybe a little flour residue, and that's it. Okay, that's literally it. So because that's it, we can start bringing our dough together. Now you're going to have dough on your hands, so you can just take a minute to pull that off if you like, or you can just wash your hands after. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. And you're going to notice it is still really crumbly. This is when we start kneading. And when we're kneading, generally there's a few different methods. So I like to take my dough, fold it in half like so, and then push it away from me. Okay? I like to fold it in half, roll it away from me. It's very easy to do, not difficult, but it does take a few minutes, and you're going to notice it's kind of sticky, right? You're going to notice your dough is like, oh, a little bit sticky. Don't add flour yet, okay? Because what happens is typically your dough is not finished processing that gluten. All-purpose flour and any flour that has wheat has gluten in it. And that gluten is what makes your dough stretchy. And what I'm doing is I'm just moving it around because there's like bits of dry pieces. So that's why I'm moving it around. But gluten makes it stretchy. And you have to develop that gluten. And the way to develop that gluten is essentially to just knead your dough. And there's a lot of ways to knead, but I like to take it slow. I like the process of kneading. You'll notice some people are really, really fast. Okay, they're really fast with kneading, and that's fine. That's great for them. But I like to take my time kneading because I really like how slow the process can be. Okay, I enjoy taking my time. I enjoy the feeling of moving that dough around, and I'm just rubbing the dough off my hands. One of the easiest way to get the dough off your hands in between is literally just to almost wash your hands. Stand here like you're washing your hands. Imagine that you have to clean in between every finger and by every nail, and just start rubbing your hands together because a lot of that will just fall off. So we're just going to pick this up as well because we don't want to leave those little bits. But you have to develop that gluten, and until you develop the gluten, your dough is going to be kind of rough, and it's not going to be soft, and it's going to be stickier than you want. Don't add flour until you're sure you need to, because at this stage, what a lot of people do is they flour their surface. I'm using a silicone mat to prevent sticking, but a lot of people will start flouring their surface. And when you flour the surface, what happens is you end up adding too much flour to your dough, and then the hydration is wrong. So we're not making sourdough, so we don't need high hydration, but you still need enough moisture for the yeast to activate, for your dough to be dough and not a solid rock, and for there to be enough stretchiness in your dough for it to rise. You need all of that to be true. So take your time. It's already getting less sticky, right? It's already feeling less sticky in my hands. And if you look at my hands, they're much cleaner than they were because the stuff is coming off my hands and going into the dough. And that's what we want. So if you have dough on the back of your hands, you can try kneading it with your fingers, and that'll help get stuff unstuck. But just take your time, be easy, be gentle. You don't want to get too crazy because that's not going to help. Crazy doesn't help. So just be gentle. How long does this take? A few minutes. Take 5 minutes. Take 10 minutes. How do you know when you're done? It stops, so it's still feeling rough. If it still feels rough, you're not done. Let's keep going. So one of the things people like about bread makers is it does this part for you. So it gently, because bread makers do it gently, they gently knead the dough until it is appropriately mixed. And this is actually getting there. I can feel it. So when you're done, what should it feel like? Well, it should feel smooth, and that this is feeling smooth right now. Okay, it's feeling smooth. That's good. We like smooth. Okay, and it's feeling elastic. I'm starting to feel the elasticness forming here, which is nice. And I'm just bringing that back up. Sorry, I lost the chat. That's okay. We're not going to worry about it. Anyway, we are being slow and gentle. Okay, slow and gentle. We're being careful, and it starts to feel elastic under your hands, and it feels smooth. When you first start, it almost feels pebbly because you have flour that hasn't broken down and hasn't kind of done its gluten thing. So it'll feel kind of pebbly, and we don't want it to feel pebbly, right? So if it's still feeling pebbly in your hands, you're not quite done. When the pebbly feeling goes away, the next thing you're looking for is, does it feel elastic? And how do you judge that? When you fold it over and put it away and you let go, does it kind of follow your hands without sticking? Okay? Does it kind of bounce back? So when I do it now, it is bouncing back a little bit, right? It's not wanting to be so compressed. So that's letting me know that it's almost done. The other thing is, it's not as sticky. Okay, when I was first handling it, it was all over my hands, right? Like it was constantly getting stuck and sticking between my fingers, doing all the things you don't want it to do. Now, it doesn't stick. I lift my hands up and it doesn't stick. Now, it should have some minor stickiness, not enough to stick to your hands, but it should not be just bouncing around. It should have a little bit of adhesion to your mat. I'm using a silicone mat. So it should peel up easily, like I shouldn't have to fight it. But you should almost feel a little resistance. So it shouldn't be so dry that it just comes right off without a sound, but it shouldn't be wet enough that you can't get it off without a fight. You don't want to be fighting your bread dough. So I'm actually really close to done. Okay. I'm really close to done. Okay, yeah, there it is. Then what you want to do is kind of pinch the bottom together to form a ball. Then we have a clean bowl that has just the tiniest bit of oil in it. Pop your dough in there. And yes, this works for any dough. Yes, we're making buttermilk bread, but you don't have to. This technique works for most breads. Okay, so I flipped my dough over. Again, roll it around in that slightly oiled bowl. Then we're going to pop this lid on. Pop the lid down. Ooh, that was loud. Set that aside to rise. How long will it take to rise? Probably an hour. Now, that's plus or minus because a lot of things affect how long it takes to rise. A lot of things like the temperature in your house, the humidity in your house, how well you kneaded the dough. If you over kneaded the dough, so if you kneaded too much, your dough is going to be kind of grainy and it won't want to rise very much. And you might end up, it might just take too long. So after that's risen, it should look like this. This is my second dough, okay? All ready, all nice and ready to be very gently manipulated and set to rise. So it should feel like once it's done rising, about an hour, maybe 45 minutes, maybe 90 minutes, depends. So this feels like a marshmallow, like a cloud. It should be soft and gentle and have a mild stickiness. Not lots, just a little. It's mildly sticky. So then what you want to do is, they call it punching down, where you just want to squeeze the air out, because while it was rising, yep, there was a bunch of air in it. So I'm just looking for air bubbles, pushing them out. That's fun. We like pushing them out. Now we need a pan to let it rise in. I have a bread pan. We need to grease our bread pan. You can do that in a lot of different ways. You can grease your bread pan with butter and flour, with goop. you can make a goop out of water and flour and a couple other things. You can spray it with cooking spray, which is what I'm doing. Nothing wrong, little cooking spray. This pan tends to be very sticky, so it gets extra cooking spray. But you can do anything you need to make sure this doesn't stick. You don't want it sticking in there. Then we need to turn it into a loaf. So what we're going to do is we're going to flatten it a bit so it's roughly the same thickness. Okay, that's important. Roughly the same thickness. Then we're going to fold our ends in and fold this over. There are a lot of ways to shape dough. Okay, which method you pick, it doesn't matter. Whatever works for you, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated. You just want to make sure your seams are really well pinched so your bread doesn't undo in the bread pan. Okay, pop the bread in the bread pan, set that aside to rise. How long? Probably another hour. It's not something that happens instantly. So again, you have to give the dough a chance to do its job. The gluten has to develop. The carbon dioxide, which is what yeast releases, has to rise that bread. It has to slowly stretch. Don't rush it. In the meantime, we have our third loaf. This is again buttermilk bread. Yes, I'm going to end up with 3 loaves of buttermilk bread. Yes, that doesn't bother me. I like buttermilk bread quite a lot. And what I'm going to do is I have an egg here. If you're wondering why this is so small, it's because it's from my Silkies. I like Silky eggs for glazing because they're smaller. Whoops. And that's why I don't crack directly into ingredients. Whoa. I'm bad at cracking eggs. I'm bad at it. There we go. There we go. Throw that shell over here where it can later go to the chickens. Yay. Okay. This needs to bake now. This has been rising for a good hour, almost hour and a half. It's dry right now because it's a weird spring, warm, cold, warm, cold. It's been a weird spring. So it's kind of dry outside right now. But I'm taking an egg here, and I like using the Silky eggs because there's not a ton of egg to them. They're smaller, so I don't have to use up an entire regular chicken egg or, heaven forbid, a nice big duck egg. So we are going to take this and just glaze our bread gently, not too much. You don't want to goop it on there. If you goop it on there, you're basically going to have scrambled egg baked over the top of your loaf. We're just doing this to add a little moisture to make sure that while it's baking, we don't lose moisture because that can happen. While it's baking, if it's not coated, you're going to end up with a drier bread because a lot of moisture starts escaping. And we don't want moisture to escape. We want moisture to stay in here. So we are taking our brush, our basting brush, a clean basting brush, and making sure we've coated our bread with egg. Now I'm going to pop this in the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for, 30 minutes, something like that. It's plus or minus really till it's cooked. I do 30 minutes, but some people do 40 minutes. I like a slightly lighter crust. As long as it's cooked, it doesn't matter. So cook it till it's done. It'll be cooked in 30 minutes. You might want to cook it longer than that if you do indeed want a darker bread. I'm cooking on the not quite lowest level of my oven. Not the lowest rack. I am on the one above it. But I don't want to be on the middle rack because that middle rack is a little bit too high and your top can scorch. So not the middle rack, the one below it. Depending on how many racks your oven actually has, like ours has like 7 positions. I know most people don't. So ours has a lot of positions. You might actually be on the bottom rack. You don't want to be too close to the top of the oven or the top can scorch. While we are waiting for that to bake, I did have some questions people had submitted in advance for people who either couldn't be here at the live stream because they're going to watch it later, which is most people watch it later, let's be honest, or people who were just didn't want to drop a question in the comments, but they did know I was going to do this live stream and they're basically watching it later and they wanted their questions in. So I do have a list of, what do I have? 18 questions or something like that? Something. So we're going to go through them. And if you have a question, you can drop it in the chat. I will see it because I've got the chat on my phone right here, just in case I need it. You never know. I haven't been live streaming very long. So hopefully this goes okay and I answer some questions. So one of the first questions I got when I said I was going to make buttermilk bread, one of the first questions was, what is the difference between using buttermilk versus regular milk versus water in your bread? Well, that's a good question. It does make a difference. What is that difference? Buttermilk it gives you a softer bread, a more tender bread, and it'll have a slightly tangy taste to it because buttermilk is tangy. And it will have a little bit of a longer shelf life. When I say that, I mean by about 2 days. I don't mean if you use buttermilk, suddenly your bread's going to be good for 3 weeks. Homemade bread doesn't stay good that long. Okay, you have a handful of days before you either have to freeze it or eat it. So when I say it'll give you a longer shelf life, 2 to 3 days extra shelf life, and that's literally it. So when I say longer shelf life for buttermilk, by a little bit, only a little bit. What about regular milk? Well, regular milk gives you a really rich bread, a bread you're really going to enjoy because it's going to be very rich, very creamy. But the thing with regular milk is it could reduce the hydration of the dough. So if you are using regular milk, either increase your liquid by 2 to 3 tablespoons to account for that, add an extra egg to add the hydration, or add 2 tablespoons of water. That's why a lot of bread recipes will tell you put 1 cup of milk plus 1 tablespoon of water. It's for the hydration because milk will often drop that hydration, but it does result in a richer, creamier bread. So yeah, I do tend to use milk or buttermilk instead of water. What are the benefits of using water? Water is neutral. Okay, it's a very neutral flavor. So if your bread is something where you're highlighting the taste of something, maybe you want to highlight the taste of a cheese, or you're putting in a lot of nuts, or something where you really want a distinct flavor, then if you use water, it's very neutral. Okay, and that neutral is exactly what you're aiming for if you're trying to highlight the flavor of another ingredient. So water has its benefits. Water also comes straight out of the tap. So half the time you are going to be like, I'm just going to use water. And water is always a perfectly fine choice. If you don't have buttermilk or you don't have milk or you simply don't want to take the time to go get them out of the fridge, water will work fine. Okay? There's nothing wrong with using water. So next up, my next question that I had is, why do I put sugar in my bread dough and can you leave it out? So yes, you can leave it out. Sugar is not required. I usually, not always, because there are some recipes that absolutely do not need sugar or honey at all, but I usually add either sugar or honey. I tend to lean more towards the honey. I used sugar today because that was what was behind me on the counter and I didn't grab the honey before the live stream started. It's literally, I could have gone either way. It wouldn't have mattered. But I do lean towards using sugar quite a bit, or honey. Honey is my preference. It improves the flavor. It improves the texture, and it does improve the appearance. Now, when I say we're adding sugar, you notice in this bread here that we mixed, this one, I added only a tablespoon. That was literally it. There was a tablespoon of sugar in the entire loaf. So even when you add sugar or a tablespoon of honey instead, your bread is not going to be as sweet as like Wonder Bread that you buy at the store. That stuff's really sweet. It has a lot of sugar in it. Okay, so that stuff is really sweet. This is not going to be that sweet. It's still going to be sweet, but it's not going to be that sweet. So it'll have a slightly sweetened taste. Okay, but in addition to all of those things, so it can improve the texture, it can improve the flavor, it can improve the appearance, it can also help prevent the foods from drying out quite as fast. So it kind of retains a little bit more moisture. And if you've ever left sugar out and had it turn into a lump, especially brown sugar does that, you'll know that it likes to retain stuff, right? It likes to retain things. So it'll just turn into a chunk and it'll either have too much moisture or have not enough. But in a bread recipe, okay, specifically in a bread recipe, it is really quite good because it allows you to keep your bread from drying out quite as fast. And again, I don't mean by days. I mean, it'll give you an extra day or two. Okay. I absolutely do not mean that all of a sudden your bread is going to be good for 3 weeks. It's not. Okay. It's not going to be okay. It's not going to work that way. Maybe, but no. And also, if you want a darker crust color, honey or sugar is the way to go. Sugar gives you a slightly darker crust color than honey, but if there's none of the sweeteners at all in your bread, your crust will have difficulty getting quite as dark. So if you like a darker crust, you might want to add a sweetener. And then, of course, if you're making a sweet bread, an bread that's supposed to taste sweet, not the stuff on the store shelf that tastes way sweeter than bread really should, but I'm talking about a bread that's actually supposed to taste sweet, like the base recipe for your cinnamon rolls or something like that, then you definitely want to use sugar. And those recipes usually use a little more sugar. Like this only had a tablespoon, but something like if I was making cinnamon buns, it might have up to a quarter cup. They're sweet. They're supposed to be. So you do not have to use sugar. You can omit it, and a lot of recipes do omit it on purpose, like a French bread or a Italian bread often do not have sugar. However, your rise time will be increased. Okay? Your rise time will absolutely be increased. I'm going to put this away while I talk. So definitely you want to account for the fact that sugar does help feed the yeast. And without that sugar, you are going to have a little bit more, you're going to have a little bit longer rise time. So also account for that, okay? And just remember that things will rise a little bit slower. They still will rise and they'll still get to the same height. It'll just take longer. And the crust color will be a little bit lighter, okay? That's fine though. All right, the next question I had. How do you know when your dough is kneaded enough when you're kneading your dough? Okay, I did answer this when I was kneading my dough, but I'll answer it again. You will kind of know by the feel. So it'll feel smooth instead of grainy. When you first knead it, it feels kind of grainy, and you don't like that. You don't want grainy. But it'll also be elastic, and it won't tear as easily. I've got bread pieces on me, dough pieces on me. That's fun. But so it'll be smooth, elastic. It won't tear as easily. And it won't be rough, and it won't be sticky. And when those 5 things are true, you want to stop, because over kneaded dough is going to be tough and difficult to stretch, and it won't rise very well. So definitely knead until the dough is smooth and elastic, and then stop. If you over knead, your dough is not going to rise very well. So know when to stop, okay? That's important, when to stop. I'm just going to move this guy a little bit because he's rising before our eyes. So we'll just move him where you can see a little better. Next question. What is the best way to tell if your bread is fully baked? I get this one a lot. You could do the toothpick thing, but remember, this is dough, not batter. So there's often not batter to stick to a toothpick. That's not the best way. First thing you want to do is, does it look cooked? If it does not look cooked, it's not cooked. So if its crust hasn't goldened yet, it's not turned golden, then it's not cooked yet. The next thing you want to look for is, has it started to pull away from the edges of the pan? As it bakes, first it will expand, but then as it starts to reach baked, it'll start to pull away from the sides of the pan. Okay, so you want to pay attention to that. The next thing you want to do is, when it's pulled away from the sides of the pan and it's a nice golden color, give it a tap. I'm not going to tap. This is raw. I'm not going to tap dough. It's not going to help, but you tap it. Does it sound hollow, or does it thunk? Does it ting, or does it thunk? Because a hollow loaf will sound hollow, okay? But it's not really hollow. It's just baked, because the air can move around now because there's not this sticky dough in the center anymore. So if it sounds hollow when tapped, it is likely cooked. And if it's pulled away from the sides and it's a nice golden color, you're probably fine. If you're worried, let it sit for 20 minutes before you cut it. The longer you let it sit, because when you first take it out of the oven, it's still baking a little bit. So when you let it sit, it finishes baking, and then your bread will not be gummy. It won't be sticky. It'll be just lovely, delicious bread. Okay. So that's how you know it's cooked. Next question was, can you use this recipe for rolls and buns? Yes. Almost any recipe can be turned into buns or dinner rolls, depending on your needs. So all you would do differently is instead of shaping it into a loaf, you would shape it into however many buns or rolls you wanted. Just shape it gently in your hand, place it on a pan or in a mold or whatever you're using, and go that way. So almost every bread recipe, you can use it for buns or rolls or whatever. Okay, so yes, you can do that. And next question, let's check what the next question is. What is your favorite way to use leftover buttermilk? I make waffles. If I have just a little bit of buttermilk left over, I make waffles in the morning. I really like waffles. They're delicious. Who doesn't love waffles? Waffles are great. I make waffles. If it's fry night, which it happens to be tonight, tonight for dinner, we are breaking out the deep fryer and making fried chicken and fried potatoes, then I use it for the fried chicken. If you put the fried chicken in the buttermilk, it just makes them tender and juicy and delicious, and it's fantastic. You obviously don't deep fry them in the buttermilk. You dip them in the buttermilk, and then you put them in your batter, and it's fantastic. It's fantastic. So I never have leftover buttermilk because I use it up pretty quick. How do you get a good rise? Okay, a couple of things. 3 basic things. First of all, you want to make sure you kneaded just enough, not too much. So you don't want to over knead, and you don't want to not knead enough. You want to knead until the dough is smooth and elastic. Okay, then it's ready to rise, and it will rise better when it's been properly kneaded and not under or over. And then you want to make sure it's pliable enough. So it shouldn't be stiff. If you don't have enough hydration in your dough, it may be fairly stiff, and you don't want a stiff dough. Okay, you want a dough that is fairly pliable, easy to manipulate. So you want to make sure it's soft. Okay, soft like this dough here. Even though it's rising, it's pretty soft. So you want a soft dough. The final thing is patience. Okay, I don't know if this guy is going to be risen enough by the end of this live stream to put in the oven. That's why the other guy's in the oven. I do not know that this guy is going to be ready to do that. Okay, and that guy is getting very big. I can just see him through the glass. Oh, he's happy. That dough is quite happy with itself. Okay, sorry, I got distracted. But mostly it's patience. So for this dough that we mixed at the beginning of the live stream, he has to sit. Like if I check him now, where it's only been, what, half an hour? It's not been much time at all. He's not done rising. If I were to go now, he's not soft, he's not pliable. I will not get a good second rise. So he needs to be ignored for at least another half hour, probably 45 minutes, right? So, sorry, that's my phone beeping away. But he's not ready, okay? He's 100% not ready to be taken out of there and put in a bread pan. You have to have patience. That's why I said at the beginning of the live stream, it takes 4 hours to make a good loaf of bread on a good day. It could take you longer if your humidity or your temperature in your house is too low, okay? It could take you a lot longer. So you have to have the patience, and you have to allow the bread the time to develop. Signs that your yeast is too old. The first sign will be your bread didn't rise. If it didn't do its first rise at all, and it's just sitting there like a lump, then your yeast is probably too old. If you want to know for sure, get some, just about half a cup of warm water, sprinkle half a teaspoon of sugar in there, give it a mix. That'll feed any yeast. Sprinkle your yeast on top, wait 10 minutes. Is it bubbling? Is it blooming? No? Then it's dead. If it's blooming, then something else went wrong, and things can go wrong when you're making bread. So yeah, you definitely want to consider that your yeast might be dead, okay? Your yeast literally might be dead. So if your loaf didn't rise at all, check your yeast. Buy new yeast if you have to. It's not super expensive. Buy it in small quantities if you don't bake a lot. Like I bake a lot, So I buy huge amounts of yeast because I go through huge amounts of yeast. But if you're not going to go through it, buy a small amount, maybe buy the envelopes. If you're really not going to bake very much, go with active yeast, the dry active yeast, which is not ready to go right in the dough. You have to bloom it in water. And the reason you would go with that is it's got a longer shelf life. So if you're really not going to bake, go with something with a longer shelf life. Next question. Oh, difference between active dry yeast and instant yeast. Well, active dry yeast is bigger, so each individual piece will be bigger. So this is instant yeast, and I'll just show you on my fingers here. See? It's very small. Okay, it's pretty small stuff, kind of grainy, you know? It's small, small, small. Regular yeast, I'm not putting this back in the jar, but active dry yeast is bigger, okay? Active dry yeast is quite a bit bigger, and it's not ready to mix into the dough. You have to bloom it first. This will not require blooming. You can just put it right in your dough, and it will cause rising to happen. The active dry has a longer shelf life, like we just talked about. So which one you pick is entirely up to you. I have both because you never know what I'm going to do. You never know what I'm in the mood for. I alternate based on no rhyme or reason. So it doesn't matter. But whichever one you want to use is the one you should use. Okay? So make sure that you know that you're not going to use it very much. And if you know that, like, figure it out. How many loaves of bread are you going to bake in a month? If it's not going to be that many, maybe don't get the instant, get the active dry. It'll last longer. If you're going to bake a lot and you don't want to wait for things to bloom because that's annoying, then you might want to get instant. Again, I have both. They both work. Okay. The instant rises a little faster. Active dry takes a little longer, but you will get the same results. And there's no taste difference. There's no nutritional difference. They are pretty much identical, except for one of them you can put directly in and the other one needs to be bloomed. One of them has a longer shelf life. One of them needs to be used fairly quickly. So it's relatively easy. Next question was, does the weather affect the bread? Yes. If you usually are very successful with bread and it always rises and it always looks great and it's wonderful, and then all of a sudden you're like, what? This one's so squashed. It didn't rise and you haven't done anything different. You've used the same ingredients. Your yeast is fine. Be the weather. Is it really cold in your kitchen? Your dough's not going to want to rise very much. Is it not humid enough? If it's really dry in your house, things are not going to rise. The humidity is required for your dough to rise. That's why a lot of people will rise their dough in the microwave. I do that a lot. I take my dough and I stick it in the microwave, my loaves, and I stick it in the microwave so that it rises because it traps the humidity and it keeps the heat fairly consistent. So yeah, you definitely want to make sure the temperature and the humidity is cooperating. The pressure, the pressure has a little bit of an effect, but it's mostly the heat and humidity. You don't want it too cold and you don't want it too dry in your house. So if it's really cold or really dry, consider heating your oven to like 150 degrees Fahrenheit for maybe 2 and then turning it off and then letting your dough rise in there because it'll just give it a little more heat. And if you need a little bit extra moisture, again, the inside of your microwave will usually help contain moisture. You can also pop a pan full of water inside the oven while you're rising just to add humidity, and don't open the oven. You're not cooking the dough, you're just rising the dough. But it helps just give that little extra oomph to your dough if it's having trouble rising because it's really dry or really cold in your home. How do you store fresh bread? Best way. Okay, so depends on how long. Short-term storing bread is not difficult. You can use anything that keeps the air away from the dough, especially the cut end. The cut end of your loaf, you don't want that exposed to air. So you might use a plastic bag, you might use a beeswax wrap or wax paper, just something that keeps the air off your bread. Make sure it's tightly wrapped so that there's not a lot of air circulation. If you want to store it longer term, you're going to want to freeze it. Again, wrap it so it's not exposed to air because you don't want freezer burn. And then you can freeze it for several months. Do not put it in the fridge. Okay. The fridge is damp and not a good place for dough, for bread, for cooked bread. Okay. So don't put it in the fridge. Pack it up and either leave it on your counter, not in direct sunlight. Direct sunlight will dry out your bread and that's not fun. And put it somewhere dark and fairly cool, but not cold as cold as your fridge. So dark and cool in your cupboard or whatever is fine. Keep the air off the bread. If you're freezing it, again, air off the bread. It'll last longer. So just don't put it in the fridge, either on the counter, in your cupboard, or in the freezer, not in the fridge. Do I ever use a bread machine? Yes, that's what this is. Okay, that's what this is. Plenty of my recipes I've done the bread machine. It really doesn't matter. I've also used the mixer with the dough hook. It literally doesn't matter. There's really no difference. You can't tell whether I mixed it by hand. So just to be clear, because I was doing 3, this is mixed by hand. This one was mixed by the bread maker. And that one was mixed in the mixer with the dough hook. Because I was doing 3 at once and I was not doing 3 out by hand all at once. No, thank you. So yes, you can use your bread maker. Follow the directions on your bread maker. Use one that has fairly decent reviews. I've reviewed 2 bread makers so far. I've been fairly pleased with both of them. I like the Starfrit better than this one. I will review the next bread maker I get as well to tell you how it works. Follow the directions on your bread maker. If you're using a stand mixer, just mix the dough, then you take it out and you knead it. The bread maker will knead for you. It does a fairly good job. I would still check. Okay, I would still check your dough to make sure it is soft and elastic before it goes into its first rise cycle, because that will allow you to make sure that the bread maker did its job. Maybe you have to knead it a little more. Just check. Maybe it doesn't have quite enough moisture. It's a good idea to check. Just the way you're looking at it when you're mixing it in a stand mixer, you're looking at it, you're touching it. It's always a good idea to check. So make sure that your bread maker is doing its job. I don't tend to bake in the bread maker very often. Sometimes I will if I'm in a real rush, but for the most part, I use it to mix the dough and then I take the dough out and shape it, right? I tend to make loaves like this. I tend not to make loaves in the bread maker, but you certainly can. I do when I test bread makers. I do when I first get them to make sure everything is functioning and I don't have to take it back. But for the most part, I don't bake in them. I just mix in them. They're fine for baking. They really are. I just tend not to. I like to bake in my own molds and stuff. That's all for that side. I got to flip the page over. Awesome. So what is a good substitute for buttermilk? I get that one a lot because a lot of people don't have, I use a lot of buttermilk, so I never have a reason to not have buttermilk. A lot of people really don't buy it because they don't use it enough. So if you want to make something like this buttermilk bread and you don't have buttermilk, can you use a substitute? Sure. You can use regular milk. Just use a cup of regular milk and add about a tablespoon of vinegar or lemon juice. That will help turn your milk sour, and it's kind of more buttermilk-like. It's not a perfect substitute, but it's close. You could also use yogurt. You could use about 1.25 cups of just plain yogurt if you have yogurt. That really works as well to get you kind of the same texture and flavor of this buttermilk bread. Next up was, can you use whole wheat flour in this recipe? Yep. What I wouldn't do, I would not do 100% whole wheat. 100% whole wheat is very dense, has a very difficult time rising, and I just wouldn't do it. I would either do 2 cups of all-purpose flour and 1 cup of whole wheat, or if you wanted a darker whole wheat bread, I would use 2 cups of whole wheat and 1 cup of all-purpose. That all-purpose just helps you with the fluffiness and the texture of your bread. That will give you the nuttiness and the deep, rich taste of whole wheat, or rye, if you'd rather use rye. But it will also allow you that fluffiness, the fluffy texture of the all-purpose. So I like to kind of meet in the middle. I like to not do 100% whole wheat or 100% rye. They're very dense. So if you still want it fluffy, make sure you have some all-purpose in there. Number 15. I lost my spot. There we go. What is the best flour for making sandwich bread if you're trying to mimic the texture of store-bought bread? The answer to that is always going to be all-purpose. Okay, you could use a bread flour, but all-purpose does the best job of mimicking that store-bought sandwich texture, especially if you have kids who have texture issues and they don't want to eat something that's different. Using the all-purpose flour for your kids' bread can be a lifesaver, because sometimes if you use the bread flour, it's too soft. Sometimes you don't want to do whole wheat because they don't like it. So sometimes just the best thing to do is, if you're making sandwich bread, especially if your kids have texture sensitivities, you might want to just stick with all-purpose. It really is a well-rounded flour, so it works for almost anything. What was the first thing I ever baked? Well, I've been baking with my mom and my grandma for my entire life, okay? Literally my entire life has been with them baking, and I don't remember a time when I didn't. The first thing I remember baking, I'm just going to get my cooling rack here, but the first thing I remember baking was probably cupcakes with my grandma. Now, I've baked with mom and grandma forever, right up until my grandma passed away. My mom's still alive, so I still bake with her. But the first thing I can ever remember baking was just plain old vanilla cupcakes at her place with my grandpa. I think that's the first thing I remember baking. A long time ago now, I'm not young, but yeah, that's the first thing I remember baking. The bread, by the way, will be out in about 2 minutes. I'll check it. One more question here. I have actually 4 or 5 more questions. Do I have a baking disaster story? Yeah. So the first time I ever made bread, no, didn't go well. It was an unmitigated disaster, mostly because, I'm just going to check on the bread here, but mostly because I was getting clever. The first time I attempted bread, I was 13. Who knows everything about everything? 13-year-olds. So I was getting clever. I don't need to do it the way mom does it. I don't need to do it that way. I'm going to do it my way. I'm not going to bloom the yeast. We only had active dry at the time. I don't feel like it. I'm just going to throw it in. I'm not going to knead it. That's too much work. I'm not doing that. No. So at the grand old age of 13, I baked a brick. It was awesome. Yeah. Mom thought it was hilarious because she's like, you really should follow. No, I don't want to follow directions. I don't want to follow the steps. No. I was 13, knew everything about everything. Yeah, that was my probably biggest baking disaster, only because it was entirely my fault. We all have disasters. We've all burned something. We've all overcooked or undercooked something. It happens, right? This one was entirely me being an idiot. So I was 13. 13-year-olds tend to be idiots. And I very much was. I very much was an idiot at 13. You think you know everything, you know nothing. So that was probably my biggest baking disaster. I'm just going to put my oven mitts on. These, by the way, are fantastic. If you get a chance to get mitts like this, they don't have to be this brand. This brand's not important. But if you have a chance to get gloves like this, where you can move your individual fingers, and these are actually for the barbecue. They're fantastic. Seriously, get yourself some of these. They're so much easier to get things in and out than those old style cotton gloves that eventually you accidentally leave on the stove and you accidentally light on fire because you turned on the element while they were sitting on the stove and then the fire alarm goes off. I didn't do that. Wasn't me. Definitely wasn't me. I'm going to check the bread. That's the bread. I always set a timer. Okay. I have it on a pan here. Let's just pull you over. I'm going to like that bread. Pull you over there. Oh, yeah. So, again, the way to check that it's cooked when your bread comes out, you want to check that it's cooked. Is it pulled away from the sides? And yes, it is. I'll bring it up to the camera, and you can see that it has indeed pulled away from the sides. It's excellent. We like pulling away from the sides. So look at the corners. You can see that it's pulled away from the corners a little bit. That's what you want, okay? You want it to pull us away from the corners just a little, okay? It's a good thing. And it looks cooked. It's got a nice golden color. It's hollow when tapped. Now, the hollow when tapped thing only works when it's first out of the oven. This still has to have some resistance to it because we all know that once a dough is baked and then it cools, it's softer, right? So you can't tap something that's been out of the oven for 20 minutes. But in this case, yes, hollow. Very good. It's definitely cooked. So, next question. I was on Baking Disaster Story. Yeah, that was mine. Yeah, just because I'm an idiot. After that was, what is my favorite bread to make? What is my comfort bread? So I like sub sandwiches. So my choice is always going to be in the shape of a sub sandwich. And by the way, one recipe like this can make you 4 of those. And I have really nice molds. I can show you my molds. I love these molds. These give me perfect sub sandwiches. If somebody stole my molds, I'm going to be annoyed. Never mind. Somebody just put my mold under something. That was loud. Don't need to be that loud, Leanne. Anyway, these are my molds. These are literally a silicone mold. A silicone mold that has 5 cavities. It's basically silicone mesh. Okay, and you put it on a pan. And once you put it on the pan, you fill up the cavities. Okay, and they expand, they rise. It's really good. It's fantastic. I love this. So that's my favorite form. My favorite recipe is a toasted oat because there's nothing quite like a sub sandwich on a toasted oat bun. So if you've never had a toasted oat bun, you definitely want to try toasted oat bread. Whatever form you like. Do you like bread? Do you like dinner rolls? Do you like sub sandwiches? I love them as sub sandwiches, but toasted oat bread, so fantastic. It's got the oats on the top. It's got oats inside the bread. It's very good. It's very, very good. It's my favorite. That's the kind I make if I'm making bread just for me. If I could only bake one thing for the rest of my life, what would it be? The one thing I would bake for the entirety of my life forever would be bread. I am a bread fanatic. I think bread is literally the best thing on the planet. I love bread. Bread is top tier. You can do so much with it. You can have it as a dinner roll. You can have it as a sandwich. You can make subs. You can just eat it hot out of the oven. It's fantastic. Bread is fantastic. Finally, what is an ingredient you can't live without? Salt. And it's not because I like everything salty. It's just that when you leave salt out, I'm going to put egg on this one and put him in. He's ready. To be fair, he's been rising since the beginning of this live stream, really. So he's ready. And we are approaching the end of the live stream, by the way. So if you have a question, drop it in the chat now. But I'm just going to do this and then get this guy in the oven. He will come out of the oven after the live stream's done. I have no intention of live streaming for another half hour. I don't have time. I do not have time. I have a new rabbit in the barnyard. I have to get him settled in. His name is Zai. I took him in as a rescue. So I have stuff to do today. Put that in there. Set the timer. Let's set the timer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. Holding for 6 seconds is 30 minutes on that stove. Okay. Not the point. Nobody cares how long it takes to set that. So why can't I live without salt is the question I was answering. It's because it unifies flavors. So this has salt in it, right? That has salt. Only a teaspoon in the entire loaf. So this loaf will give you multiple sandwiches. And in this loaf, there's only a teaspoon of salt. It's not a high salt food. If you leave out the salt, you are going to find that, one, your yeast doesn't know when to turn off. Salt is basically that's enough rising now in a yeast bread. But the other thing is you will find the flavors fall flat. A teaspoon of salt in your loaf of bread or a 1/4 teaspoon of salt in your cookies just unifies the flavors, okay? And what it does is it just ups it a notch. It's almost difficult to describe. Make a batch of cookies with a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and make one without, and then try them. You're going to notice that the one with just a tiny bit of salt, one where you made 24 cookies with just a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, tastes so much better. The flavors are more intense. The flavors are brought together because that's what salt does. Yes, salt can make things salty if you add a lot to it. But a teaspoon of salt in this amount of dough is not going to make your bread salty. What it's going to do is it's going to unify the flavors of everything else. Unify the flavors of the duck egg, of the buttermilk, of the little bit of sugar that's in here. It's going to unify all those different flavors and give you one beautiful, delicious bread that you're just going to really enjoy. So don't skip the salt. That is the single ingredient of every ingredient in my kitchen that I would not trade. Okay? Salt has been valuable for a very long time for a very good reason. And it's because it's a fantastic, fantastic ingredient. So, final thing I'm going to answer. The final thing I'm going to answer is, why do I use duck eggs instead of chicken eggs? I don't always. It depends if I have duck eggs. So my ducks are laying right now. I have lots of duck eggs. Like if I go over here and grab this, I have so many duck eggs. Okay? And these are dirty eggs, so I'm not going to touch them because I am working on bread. And these eggs have not been washed. They live on my counter till I wash them and stick them in the fridge. I have so many duck eggs. It's a ridiculous amount of duck eggs. So one, I use them because I've got them. But two, what is a good reason to use duck eggs? That's a good question. Duck eggs are really awesome. I love duck eggs. So duck eggs are higher in fat, which is not a bad thing. Okay? That's not a bad thing. Some people are like, oh no, they're higher in fat. I better not have a duck egg. They're higher in fat by just a little bit. Just a little. And that slightly higher fat content and slightly higher yolk to white ratio than a chicken egg results in a richer, fluffier bread that just rises better. It doesn't need as long to rise because there's something about those duck eggs that just make it rich and delicious and fantastic. And it just increases the rising of your dough. It's fantastic. I love duck eggs in baking. I don't like eating eggs. I was going to say I don't like eating duck eggs, but that's not entirely true. I do not like eating any eggs. I don't like the taste of egg. But eggs in baking are fantastic. Okay? Eggs in baking are perfect. I'm not going to eat an egg, but I'm going to put all the duck eggs in my, I'm turning this on its side, but I'm going to put all the duck eggs in my bread. I love duck eggs. So that's why I use duck eggs instead. They do result in a better product, but I don't always use duck eggs because sometimes I simply do have duck eggs. Let's take this off. This is still very hot. No, I'm not going to cut this on camera because I'm about ready to end the live stream. I've been going for over an hour. But that is a beautiful loaf of bread. So it's hot, so I don't want to play with it too much. It's very hot. I'm not going to pick it up when it's that hot. That was a mistake. Youch. I always make that mistake. But that is a delicious, fantastic loaf. I'm really looking forward to cutting into it and having a few sandwiches tonight. I absolutely love sandwiches. If I could only eat one food my entire life, it would be sandwiches because they're perfect. They're the perfect unification of ingredients. Anyway, that loaf is lovely. I will put gloves on and bring it up closer because you deserve to see it. But it absolutely is a wonderful, wonderful loaf. Nicely baked, very shiny because of that beautiful, beautiful egg wash we put on top. And just put that back down. Let that cool. Always let your breads cool for at least 10 to 20 minutes before you slice into them. And if you want the hot bread, that hot bread might be delicious, but you want your bread to not be gummy. If you slice bread too early, it can have that kind of gumminess. No. Anyway, we're about to wrap up because I am kind of done for the day. I have other things I have to get to tonight, including getting out of the kitchen so my son can start fry night. because we only have one kitchen. And if I'm taking up the entire kitchen, he's going to start to get annoyed that he can't do Friday night. So I'm going to wrap it up. This has been In the Kitchen with Andersen Acres. I am Leanne. I'm glad you guys could join us today. And we do live stream every Friday. The second Friday of every month is In the Kitchen. The first Friday is Farm Talk. The third Friday is we talk about a specific type of animal we have here on the farm. And there's a different topic each Friday of the month. And then it rolls back around and we just keep looping and doing slightly different topics each time. So feel free to join us on Friday afternoons. You never know what we're going to get up to, or just watch it as a VOD, or of course watch our regular videos as well. They're all a great deal of fun. At least I like making them. So I like making them. I don't care if people watch them. Anyway, that is about it for us here today. I hope you enjoyed hanging out with us and making a beautiful, delicious loaf of bread. We're simply excited about it because we get to eat it. Not everybody gets to eat it. We do. We get to eat it. Make your own bread. Anyway, that is literally about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. We'll see you tomorrow.